So the million-dollar question is, how bad is this recession actually going to get? The average person in America is saving only 3.7% of their income, which is roughly a third of our average since 1959, and we're almost at historic lows. And that's all thanks to wages not keeping up with inflation, which has been over 5% for 22 straight months now. And the way Americans are fighting that inflation is by borrowing more money and getting into even deeper debt. That's also why we have close to $1 trillion worth of credit card debt, and that debt is becoming more expensive. Credit card APRs are hitting almost 20%, which is the highest level since 1985. There's now a huge divergence between credit card debt, which is at an all-time high, and personal savings rates, which are close to all-time lows. And unfortunately, that debt is coming due at a time when interest rates have gone up faster than they ever have before in history, and that's just leading to more debt, less jobs, and more instability in the financial system. So to sum it up, people are making less, they're saving less, so they have to borrow more because they have no choice. And in today's video I want to help explain exactly what this economy means for the saver, the investor, the middle class, and how bad this recession might potentially get. So with that said, let's get into it. But before we start, I want to tell you that I am not a licensed investment service provider, and my videos are not investment recommendations or financial advice and should not be treated as such. If you want to support this channel, you can find the link in the video description. The good news is, so far when it comes to recession, we're not in one as defined by two negative quarter GDPs back to back. But the odds of a recession are going up, and the evidence is practically everywhere. For example, we added 236,000 jobs to the economy, and even though the unemployment rate went down from 3.6 in February to 3.5 in March, the rate of jobs is actually slowing down. As of the latest report from the Labor Department, there were 700,000 less job openings, from 10.6 million down to 9.9 million. And the good news here is that there's still about 1.7 job openings for every worker in the US. What's interesting is that data shows incomes are coming up, but when you add inflation into the data, incomes are actually coming down. Incomes were up 4.2%, but the inflation was up 6%. Now as interest rates go up to fight that inflation, to bring it down to the Fed's goal of 2%. Some jobs will be more at risk than others. Tech, for example, was the first to go, but now we're seeing that it's affecting other jobs as well. And it's mostly affecting retail, construction, and manufacturing. But even a company like McDonald's, which is a consumer staples company, which should be less prone to business cycles, is also starting to cut back. Now most of those cutbacks were on the corporate side, but still, since October of last year, 760 companies have cut 538,000 jobs. And a huge chunk of that 240,000 were cut from just 20 companies alone. Companies like UBS, Credit Suisse, Amazon, and Meta. So there's no question the economy is definitely slowing down based on all the data. And the Fed is finally getting what it wanted. But the question is, what would happen to the middle class, and what are the odds of a recession? According to statistics, by 2024 the odds of a recession are over 50%. But the way economists know this is because they look at something called the inverted Treasury yield curve. And that has reliably and accurately predicted all 10 of the last recessions since 1955. Now you've probably heard of the inverted yield curve from last year. But if you haven't, here it is. All it's doing is looking at the interest rate on long-term bonds, specifically the 10-year Treasury bond, and measures it against the 2-year Treasury bond. How you can think about it: when investors buy their bonds, the longer it takes for those bonds to return our money, the more money we expect to make from them. And that makes sense because of opportunity cost. It's the same reason if you wanted to borrow my money for 10 years, I would charge you a higher interest rate than if you wanted to borrow my money for only 2 years. Because I'm taking on a bigger risk. That's how it works in a healthy economy. But when the economy flips and we have high interest rates, if those high interest rates are hurting the economy, which is absolutely what they're doing, they're hurting the middle class and our jobs. That means people are starting to expect the Fed to lower rates to stimulate the economy once again. Historically speaking, that's been a very bad sign for the economy. And right now the inverted yield curve is so deeply inverted that we haven't seen it like this since the 1980s. And if you look across this timeline, you'll see that every single time this line has dipped below the zero trend, we got a recession shortly after. Even if the line came up, it didn't matter. In other words, even when that yield curve started to correct, it still didn't stop a recession from actually happening. Now if a recession were to happen, here's what would happen in the short term. Inflation would stay high, if not go even higher. That's because OPEC just recently announced that they're cutting oil production, and the cost of energy accounts for 7.5% of the overall inflation index. Already the cost of oil per gallon has gone up 15 cents from the month before. Americans feel inflation the most at the gas pumps. Lending data also shows that domestic banks are already tightening their lending standards. And that means if you want to get a loan to buy a car or a house, you'll need to have a higher credit score, higher income requirements, and put more money down. When it comes to jobs, we can probably expect more job cuts to spill over into other sectors of the economy, especially if Jerome Powell continues to raise the interest rates. Now that's all in the short term. In the long term though, people like Peter Schiff expect this next recession to be even worse than 2008. Another long-term side effect of the economy right now is that dollar is getting weaker. All this means is that it's going to be a lot harder for the US to export dollars overseas. Because if other countries are trading in their own currencies and they have formed their partnerships, it means less dollars will leave the US. Which means they can't push themselves out of debt. And that also means more dollars will stay in US. Which means more inflation. But arguably the biggest storm cloud over the economy right now is commercial real estate. Over the next few years, $1.5 trillion worth of loans will be due before the end of 2025. Now normally this shouldn't be much of a problem, because they can just refinance, but interest rates have more than doubled since then. Which means their loans are going to be that much more expensive. Not to mention that most of those loans are owned by the smaller banks. And as we saw this year, those banks are already in trouble. Especially if the Fed keeps raising interest rates. Now commercial real estate is also not even fully occupied after the pandemic. More and more people chose to work from home. So there's less of a need for commercial real estate. When you combine all of that with stricter lending standards, then you have to ask who's going to lend to those banks that are potentially going to go insolvent. And what will happen to property values? It's estimated that commercial real estate could fall by as much as 40%. Thanks to all these factors. And here's what the data shows. Our yield curve inverted in July of 2022. And ever since it's been going down. The evidence shows a 57% chance that a recession will start on or before late December 2023, and there's more than a 95% chance that it will start on or before late July 2024. So it really does look like a recession is pretty much inevitable by late 2024. But the good news is this. Over the last 7 rate hike cycles, investors that bought U.S. investment-grade bonds made an average 26% in the next 2 years following the last rate hike. So that was directly from a wealth management report by J.P. Morgan. And what they're telling us is based on their data. The investors that bought bonds right after the last interest rate increase made a lot of money. The trick, of course, is knowing when that last interest rate hike will take place. And here's how you can figure out how to do that. Using something called the CME Fed Watch tool. Now let me share with you the good news and how I'm investing throughout all this. The good news is that all of this is completely beyond anyone's control. We don't control interest rates or the jobs market or fiscal or monetary policy. But we do control how much we spend and what we spend it on. For example, you can start tracking your spending and then optimizing it. And asking yourself, do I really need Amazon Prime and Netflix? And I can invest the saved money. I invest in gold, silver and Bitcoin. But the best investment is in yourself through education, because no one will take that away from you. Under education, let's not only study education in schools, but also reading books, watching educational videos like this, attending courses. But you learn best from your own mistakes when you start doing something, because what you hear you forget, what you see you remember, but what you do you understand. If you are interested in multi-level marketing or want to buy some products or support this channel, there is a link on Amway in the video description. If you like the video, give it like, subscribe and turn on the bell. And don't forget, money is freedom. And keep learning.